Hello, and welcome back to It's a Very Exciting Time, a podcast by a UFO nerd and his tolerant friend. My name is Scott, and I've been fascinated by the phenomenon my entire life.
And I'm Chuck. I am quite tired of recording the same episode.
We started this podcast because since 2017, there has been a shocking set of revelations, from news of secret Pentagon programs to confirmed video of astonishing craft. In a nutshell, now that we know the government has recovered non-human technology.
Or at least we will, once the Brazilian government opens their UFO files.
It raises a natural question. If UFOs are real, what else? Suddenly, some of these other parts of the phenomenon that seemed unlikely are pulled into the realm of the possible.
And they may still be unlikely. But even if it's new RDF and not JSON.
Woo! It's a very exciting time.
Yeah. And if you that was a quote from Discord. I hope I got it right. I don't know if I did. It's been a while since that happened. But if you'd like to understand that quote, you could join our Discord by going to veryexcitingtime.com, where you can find links to our Discord, Patreon, email, all the show notes, all sorts of good things.
Yeah. And dear listeners, if you are sensing a certain frisson of frustration in our voices, this is the fourth time we have sat down to record this episode. And I don't mean, like, you often hear us joking about how we re-recorded the intro 7 times.
Yeah, right.
That'll be like sentence 2. We messed it up. No.
Yeah.
A week ago, we sat down to record as normal. We recorded 80% of the episode. It was going great. And almost at the same minute, both Chuck and I realized the little recording light was not on because we didn't push record.
Well, and to be clear, it was not actually going all right. Like, we had the reason it wasn't recording is because we had 2 hours of technical difficulties before that.
Yeah, it's true.
Somehow we forgot to click record again.
Yeah.
After
that's right. Yeah, because we had been struggling to record because of my networking problems, because my network is so freaking unreliable. I'm actually switching to fiber internet on Tuesday, so hopefully this is a thing of the past. But right now I'm still on Comcast, and last week it was particularly Comcastic. So I eventually switched to tethering to my phone to get an internet signal that was slow but stable. Then we failed to record. We got a little frustrated. We took a little break, ate a cookie, came back. We re-recorded. And that time, as far as we could tell, everything went great.
It was awesome.
It was awesome. And an hour later, Chuck texts me and he's like, "You are never going to freaking believe this. I have no audio." Like, we had been talking to each other, we heard each other, but somehow the recording that we got was my audio, our video, and no audio for Chuck. And at that point, we threw up our hands and said, okay, we'll try. In the meantime, Chuck has been on the phone with support for the recording program we used, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you upgraded to Mac OS Sequoia? There's a bug in Chrome that makes it not work there. You should switch to Safari." And Chuck said, "Great, does Safari work?" And they're like, "No, it's in beta. You should use Chrome."
Yeah. It's incredible.
Today, we sat down to record. Chuck told me, "It's great. I got my microphone problems all solved. I've been working with a buddy. Yeah. We did a test recording. We logged into our recording program. I couldn't hear anything Chuck said.
Nothing.
We just spent an hour troubleshooting this. In the end, what we found we had to do was tell the recording program to use Chuck's good microphone, even though what I am hearing is the scratchy, warbly hiss of Chuck's AirPods.
Right.
So we did a test. It seems to work. If you're hearing this at all, it means it worked and hey, we're good to go. But I just want you to understand we are fighting through some hurdles this week. We seem to be
Yeah.
cursed. I got in a car accident yesterday. Everybody's fine, but like
Yeah.
it's been a week, viewers.
It has been a week. Really has, hasn't it?
Oh man. So with that said, let's try our third or fourth or fifth or something take
I don't even
of
know.
this episode that I've been wanting to bring you for a while. Chuck,
Yeah.
today we are going to talk about one of the historic UFO cases. This is something that I've been aware of
Mhm.
for a while. People talk about it in the community,
Okay.
but the reason it's kind of come up again recently is
Yeah.
Lue Elizondo's book, Imminent, dropped. We've been talking about that for a couple of weeks, a couple episodes now.
Yeah.
And in Lue's book, he describes attending a dinner shortly after joining OSAP, which they
Okay.
had with a visiting Brazilian general. He was visiting because
Mhm.
he was setting up an arrangement to share Brazilian UAP data with the
Oh,
OSAP
that's cool.
program.
Yeah.
Super cool, right?
Yeah.
And during that dinner, Lue had his mind blown when the general shared details about a series of UFO encounters that were studied by the Brazilian Air Force. Now, I'm going to quote from Lue here. He said, I learned that in the mid 1970s, for several years running, people living along the coast of northeastern Brazil noticed strange lights and aircraft that buzzed their small towns and villages at night. The objects ranged in size from baseball-sized orbs to huge aircraft that looked as if they could transport the occupants of an entire city. Flying discs, spheres, triangles, cylinders, the variety of objects ran the gamut. Now, for centuries, humans all over the planet have reported such things, but in Brazil, these flying phenomena seemed to be targeting human beings.
Okay. I have many questions right now.
I bet.
My first question though is, why do you think that there's some, like, I don't know, aerodynamic or whatever physics property that makes the UAP shaped in such simple things? Like, it's always
Yeah, like in
triangles
geometric
or
shapes.
cylinders. Like, what is that?
That's a great question. Yeah. Now, all of that assumes that what we are seeing is a real physical object in our dimension. Some of the common theories out there include that the whole thing is a projection in our head from a non-corporeal entity, and it's just kind of picking a shape that makes sense to us. Another theory is that these are higher dimensional objects, and we've got kind of a flatland situation happening where like a fourth or fifth dimension object is protruding into our reality, and that's why they're always such weird shapes. Yeah, man. I don't know. It's
That's
super
interesting.
weird.
Okay. All right. So my second question, you said targeting humans. Like, are you talking about attacking?
I am talking about attacking. Now, Lue and the rest of the crew are very clear. This is unusual, arguably unprecedented. Almost all UAP encounters are benign. You know, like you see lights in the sky. Maybe they land in a field. Maybe you have psychic contact with an alien. Maybe they come into your house and abduct you. But we don't really hear about like UFOs like burning people and shining lasers on people and chasing people through fields. That's unusual, but that's exactly what happened in Colares. Lue says people reported being chased by a yellow orb. After several yards of pursuit, the light would turn blue before delivering a nasty laser-like blast that burned victims or left them unconscious. Other people claimed that hovering aircraft attempted to lift them off the ground with nets and hooks and drag them up into the ships. Were these hooks and nets a metaphor for some advanced technology like a tractor beam, or were primitive tools like hooks and nets actually being used? It all seemed so strange to me.
Yeah, that's crazy. Were these like the orbs that Lue talked about following him around his house in his book?
So it's hard to answer that question because orb is a generic term, right? Like we've got two different kinds of orbs. We've got the metallic spheres that Dr. Kirkpatrick showed
Yeah.
videos of flying over Mosul and stuff.
Right.
Those are widely reported, but they appear to be solid, tangible, like physical craft in a some
Hmm.
sort of drone or something like that. Like it kind of makes sense to us. The other kind we see are just like hovering amorphous balls of light.
Okay.
And who is to say whether they're all the same thing? All we see is light.
Right.
What is shining the light? Is there an object inside? Is this a side
Hmm.
effect of something else? Like, it's hard to say. But yes, Lou
Okay.
earlier in the book reported seeing hovering, floating orbs of light in his house.
Yeah.
And he reports that this is commonly reported by people interacting with the phenomenon, and that
Yeah.
their information showed that you really only had to worry about them if they were one particular color, if they were blue. Blue seemed to be hostile, other ones seemed to be
Huh.
passive. He was seeing
Okay.
green and yellow, so he kind of didn't worry
So
about it.
it's okay.
Yeah. Now, that
That's
said,
wild.
that report of the blue ones are hostile seems to be coming back to this Colares thing.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, it's hard to say with the orbs. By the way, Lou has been in the
Yeah.
news again recently about those orbs, and
Yeah.
somebody asking him the same questions you were asking, like, why didn't you
Really?
set up cameras? Why is nobody freaked out about this? And two things. One, Lou said, it literally didn't occur to me to set up cameras. And one detail about that is this is in the present day, we're used to like everyone has Nest cams
Yeah. Right.
and, security cameras are a dime a dozen. Back in the early aughts when this was happening, it was less common. And also, he's
Yeah.
like, this is my family home. I don't want to set up security cameras in every room in the house that my daughters are living in. That said, it's still
Yeah.
weird that he didn't think, like, oh, I should take a photo. Like, maybe we should research this.
Yeah. Right.
But he does specifically mention reporting it to the rest of the OSAP team and having them be kind of dismissive about it. Like, oh, yeah, that happens to everybody. It's not even worth looking into, which
That's so weird to me.
it's very strange. There is one final thing I will say about that, which is
Yeah.
we hear fairly universally in contact encounters that people have unusual reactions to what is happening. And in particular, they will often think, well, this is like not worth paying attention to, like time to go back to bed,
Sure.
or whatever. And the conclusion
Okay.
among
Yeah.
people who believe this is extraterrestrial is they are being told that, like, this is kind of a psychic command.
Yeah.
They're being manipulated into thinking no big deal. So
Right.
I don't know if that's what happened to Lou. I don't know if that's what happened to the OSAP team, but it's just another tick in the column of like encounters often tend to have this weird, like, it didn't even occur to me to take a photo. It didn't even occur to me to call
Yeah.
someone, even though these are people who professionally study this kind of stuff.
Yeah. 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 Okay. So, back to the previous quote. Did he ever get resolution on like what the nets and hooks were,
If
or
he did not explain it in the book. Now, I will
oh,
say
okay.
Lou's book is kind of full of this stuff, and it's hard to tell whether this is just the kind of writer Lou is, who just kind of likes to tease stuff and not resolve it, or whether this is a side effect of him only being able to talk about certain aspects
Right.
of what he encountered.
Sure.
The impression I get overwhelmingly is Lou wanted to put some of these things out there and whet people's appetite. And there's kind of an understanding that, of course, they studied it further, and he can't talk about the outcome of that. But all of that is reading between the lines. All I can tell you is this is the only mention of nets and hooks. I didn't find that referenced anywhere else. Certainly Lou doesn't come back and go, oh yeah, we found a hook and a rope. Like,
yeah, and I guess that would make sense. Like, if they were at a dinner, there's like a conceivable like gray area where this might not be confidential or top secret info that he heard during that meeting.
Yeah.
But he can't really talk about follow up or anything he did at work or I don't know.
Yeah,
It
what
could just
he
be an edge
is and
like that.
isn't allowed to talk about seems to be kind of confusing. And we've seen this across the board too, right? Like
Yeah.
they are able to say some things that seem outrageous, but they're somehow able to get
Right.
away with it because it's like, someone told me this. Like, well,
Right.
that's not the same thing as saying this is true. It's saying I heard
Right.
this. So who knows,
Yeah. Yeah. Often we can talk about our observations
Mhm.
and our feelings, but we can't talk about things that we researched or
Yeah,
at least that's how it is at my work.
for sure. So
So
Lue
I wonder if
continues
it's similar.
talking after the nets and hooks. He says, as attacks increased, people quashed their natural curiosity and switched to outright terror.
Mm.
If a ship or orb
Yeah.
or light appeared, they ran for their life. It didn't matter where you sought shelter. The lights pursued people to their homes and farms. Beams shot through tiled roofs as if the roofs were made of gauze, and roved intelligently through interior rooms as if searching for something. People lived in fear. They knew from experience or hearsay that if the laser touched their skin, they would be burned. Reports described blood being sucked from their bodies. Everyone called the lights chupa chupa, which means suck suck in Portuguese. I found myself moved by the photos of victims displaying their wounds and looks of resigned horror on their faces.
That is horrifying
Mhm.
um, and very discordant with the name Chupa Chupa, which sounds very cutesy.
Yeah.
Um, but so so are these? We don't hear about this kind of thing from the other abduction reports. Are they? Is this like a race of space vampires or like what?
You're joking, but a Brazilian UFO researcher's book on the topic is literally called Vampiros Extraterrestrios na Amazonia.
Oh my god.
Yeah,
Okay, so I'm not the only one to come to that conclusion.
you're not. But I will say, one of the things that I do find interesting about this, and we talked about this in the other Brazilian famous case,
Yeah.
the Virginia case, when the people involved describe a different experience and a different type of alien creature than everybody else,
Right.
it's it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't thing. On the one hand, it makes it less credible that they're the only ones describing this one type of alien.
Right.
Everybody else describes this gray alien type, and they're just in
Hmm.
Virginia, they're describing this brown alien that smells like ammonia, has ridges on the head and big red eyes.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it if you were trying to make it up and seem
Right.
credible, you would kind of want to imitate everybody else. So it's arguably a good sign that they have
Right.
differences from the other things. So I don't know what to make of the fact that this is the only one where we're hearing about blood sucking. Uh, but it's
Yeah.
also the only one where we're hearing about what sure appear to be aggressive acts. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
do with it what you will.
Different aliens,
Yeah.
I guess.
Lue continues. He says, in 1977, the intelligence branch of the Brazilian Air Force descended on the region with 20 investigators and physicians led by Colonel Holanda. Initially, they planned to interview victims, catalog eyewitness accounts, and treat the wounded. But the longer Holanda's team remained in the area, the more they witnessed these horrors for themselves. They captured footage and hundreds of photographs of mysterious objects and aircraft, one approximately 300 feet long.
300 feet. That's crazy.
Pretty big.
That's like starship sized.
Yeah, that's no tic tac.
If I remember. Yeah, that's no tick. So, like, let's see, going down the list. Military witnesses, check. Video, check. Photographs, check. I'm gonna guess that I'm gonna guess about what happened next, but please tell me.
Uh-huh. Brazilian officials shut down Holanda's investigation and circulated a story that no unusual phenomena were found. They locked down the files until the 1990s. The long retired Holanda died of apparent suicide shortly after their release. The general at dinner casually admitted that the Brazilian government had covered up what happened in Colares. His comment surprised no one. Of course, Brazil buried the truth. That's what every government has done and always will do.
Oh, I don't like that last line. Always will do.
Yeah.
but,
Lue, you got to
yeah,
remember, he got where he is through a particular sort of disillusionment with the way government
yeah,
handles this stuff.
yeah. It's a good point. So, yeah, standard playbook: classify, deny everything, swamp gas.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
So here's the deal. That's all Lue had to say about this case. But this case has been around
Okay.
for a while, and we've got quite a bit of information on it. This case features whistleblowers, it features leaked documents, it features eyewitness accounts, newspaper coverage. There are tons of photos of the victims out there. You can find them online. Like, it was well
Yeah.
documented at the time. So let's dive a little
Okay.
deeper than Lue went into it. We're going to hear from some of the witnesses
Yeah.
themselves, as well as Colonel Hollanda, who, as Lue kind of teased, in the 90s when the documents leaked, Colonel Hollanda gave interviews shortly before he turned up dead and talked about his role in it and what they experienced. So we've got quite a bit of information on what went down.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with...
Side note, this is the first time we've made it past this point without a network dying or something.
Fingers crossed, man. Don't jinx us.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with a local fisherman, Rosio Oliveira. He said, quote, "It began with lights all over Colares, sometimes in the shape of a hat or round discs like an umbrella. They seemed to come from way high up, from many places, one from the sky, one from the bay. They put out a strong light, too bright to see a shape. The light was blinding. One time, we saw 3 or 4 objects come together into one big one. They seemed to come from different directions and then joined together. Many times we could see them going across the island towards Belém. They didn't make any noise, very silent. One time we saw many UFOs coming out of the water at the same time. 1, 2, 3, 4. Many lights came out of the water. Huge objects went into the water, came down and went into the water."
So when you said when they said they joined together, are we talking like Voltron style or flying in formation? Okay,
your guess is as good as mine. This is a frustration I have sometimes, is you will see an object that is filmed and it is described as a diamond shape, but all you see is 4 lights. And unless it flies past something, you can't tell whether that's one craft with 4 lights or 4 craft flying in precision form. Similarly, if these objects are so bright you cannot see them directly and they fly together, the human eye won't be able to distinguish between 4 closely grouped objects that are extremely bright or 4 objects that merged into one. So yeah, it's unclear.
Yeah, good point. Okay. Well, and this is also interesting that he talked so much about them going into the bay because we know how much UFOs love water.
That's right. See our episode on Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet.
Yeah.
So first quote from Colonel Hollanda. He said, "That thing was happening a lot in the Colares region. The mayors in the region sent a letter to the military because these things were bothering the fishermen a lot." This is understatement of the year, by the way. We're going to get into a lot more details. He's really soft pedaling what's happening here. But yes, the mayors in the region sent a letter to the military. It's a fishing island there, and they couldn't fish anymore because it flew around the boats, and some even dived near the side of the boat.
How big is Colares?
It's not big. Now, it's a little hard to tell because if you look it up now, obviously you're going to see the current population. But some of the articles I looked at said at the time it was about 2,000 people, 1 priest, 1 doctor, mostly fishing, small fishing village.
Yeah. I wonder if that, interesting.
According to a reporter in the area, Sinaldo Oliveira, he said, quote, "About 90% of the people we talked to had seen UFOs, and a lot of fishermen got burned. They were not serious burns, but the men were so afraid they would not want to go out to work."
I don't understand why UFOs would harass fishermen from like one small island town. This is bizarre.
It's super bizarre. That said, there's a little bit of context here that helps make some sense of that. Bob
Okay.
Pratt, a UFO researcher who spent a lot of time in Brazil studying these events, said these events were part of the Colares flap. If you're not familiar with it,
Hmm.
flap is a term that UFO researchers use for a series of sightings in an area over a period of time. Um,
Okay.
so these events were part of the Colares flap, which was part of a much larger UFO wave that took place over a
Okay.
vast stretch of northern Brazil for more than 20 months in 1997 and 1977 and 1978. It began in April of
Okay.
77, several hundred miles to the east in the neighboring state of Maranhão. It then swept west over the Colares Belém area and continued far to the west towards Manaus in the Amazon region for months afterwards.
Huh. Okay. So it's not just like one isolated area.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like how big an area are we talking about here?
Yeah. It, we've joked about this in our earlier recordings. Neither Chuck or I are particularly geography buffs. And it's one of those things like you
Yeah.
kind of know abstractly
I
Brazil
know
is
it's big,
big,
but
but we're talking about this area along the northeastern coast of Brazil. And
yeah.
I just did as the bird flies between the 2 points they mentioned, the easternmost
Yeah.
point and the westernmost point is 2,000 miles.
Oh shit. So that's bigger than the west coast of the
Yeah.
US.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a large
Interesting.
region. So yeah,
Yeah.
they were seeing UFOs all up and down the coast. Colonel
Okay.
Holanda said the UFOs were moving from Maranhão to Colares, Belém, Monte Alegre, Santarém, and Manaus. They were covering the Brazilian airspace and the Amazon region in strips, like we do in aerial photography.
Whoa,
Mm-hmm.
interesting. So doing like lidar or something, but that that gets back to like Lou was saying something about feeling like they're conducting surveillance.
Absolutely. I
Um,
forget the acronym he used, but yeah, they were talking about the way that the UFOs behave globally, and in particular, in this case in Colares, look an awful lot like how we behave when we are surveying an area that we may be about to get engaged in military conflict in. You want to get a
right?
feel for the ground. Where are the population centers? What's going on here?
Yeah.
Is that what aliens are doing? It's probably a mistake to project human motivations onto them, but
Yeah, right.
that's sure what it looks like. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
Okay, so we're seeing recon over 2000 miles of the coastline. Like they must have been deeply concerned about this. How big was the Air Force investigation really?
according to Bob Pratt, he said the Air Force investigation was centered on hundreds of sightings around
Okay.
Colares and more than 2 dozen other villages, all less than 60 miles from the major seaport city of Belém in Marajo Bay. Belém is the capital of the state of Para and the home of about 2 million people.
So, uh, so 2,000 mile thing, and they're looking at 60 of those miles, and just ignored everything else.
Yeah,
Like,
typical, right?
okay,
Now, the one thing I
yeah,
will say in
sounds
their
right.
defense is the reason the Air Force was involved at all is because the mayors in the Colares region wrote in and asked for help. So they were not getting requests from 2,000 miles of coastline. They were getting requests from
Right.
Colares area in particular. And the
Hmm.
military and those mayors in particular weren't really concerned with whether lights in the sky were doing surveillance. They were concerned about attacks on the locals.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's still you would think that the Brazilian Air Force would care about 2,000 miles
You'd hope.
of other
Yeah.
incidents.
But, this gets
I
back
don't know.
into our disillusionment with how military in general handles UFO reporting. So
Or maybe we just didn't hear about it,
yeah,
and
maybe
Lou
we
didn't
didn't
hear
hear about it.
about
It's
that.
true.
I don't
Um,
know.
so, quoting from Colonel Holanda again, he said there were a number of reports from people who were hit by a light and who believed that their
Hmm.
blood had been sucked. So, we went to check, and they were mainly women. For every 10 people, 8 of them were women, who had a mark on the left breast that looked like 2 needle holes. They also had a brown
Hmm.
stain around it that looked like an iodine burn. People said that some of their blood had been sucked, and a small portion of blood had been drawn. They started calling it chupa chupa because of that fact. A light came and fell on the person, usually on the left breast of the woman, or in a man on the arm or the leg.
Huh. How do they know blood was drawn?
That is a very good question. And we've talked about this before, I think in the Virginia
Yeah.
episode. It's really hard to go back to primary sources when it's from
Yeah.
50 years ago in a country whose language you don't speak. So all of my
Yeah,
research
yeah.
is necessarily third person because it's people who
Yeah.
have looked at the Brazilian sources and translated them to English. I didn't find any, like, what I would consider hard evidence of blood draws. But Brazilian UFO researcher Tiago Cicchetti says very confidently the victims were anemic, showing low blood and iron levels.
Okay. But no actual needles, just like it's like a hypo spray from Star Trek.
Yeah.
I really, so like I've been putting off getting my blood drawn for a while, and I wish my doc could just like beam over some blood to the lab or whatever. That'd be great.
You might feel a little differently when you hear about the actual effects of these lights.
Okay.
Colonel Holland
Okay.
said,
Yeah, maybe
first
not.
came a green light that would hit the person and paralyze them. Then the green light would turn off, and
ideal.
a red ray of light would hit, burning them. A lot of people were burned.
It's terrifying. Okay, yeah, you're right. Doesn't sound great.
Yeah. Now, that said, regarding the mechanics of the blood draw, it is fascinating. There was one witness I found who described literally seeing a person hit by a beam of light and seeing like a trickle of blood flowing up the beam of light,
Wow.
which,
that's wild.
how does that even work? I have no idea.
Yeah.
Sergeant Flavio Costa, who was second in command of the Air Force team, said, people struck by a beam of light suffer what we can call a nervous breakdown, for lack of a better explanation, whose symptoms are nearly always the same: partial or total paralysis, loss of speech, chills, dizziness, hot flashes, hoarseness, tachycardia, tremors, migraine-style headaches, and progressive numbness of the area hit by the beam of light.
Not to make light of this, but that does sound like the side effects from an average commercial on TV.
Yeah,
hot flashes,
that's right.
cold flashes.
Are alien encounters right for you? Ask your doctor.
Exactly. So like this is a lot of different cases. How many people were actually attacked? Like,
that's
how
a
many
great
are we
question.
talking about?
And it's a little unclear.
Okay.
Bob Pratt's leaked documents has at least 20 reports of people being paralyzed and injured by beams of light. Tiago Cicchetti, who I mentioned earlier, he said over 2,000 people were attacked, but I am reasonably certain he is referring to the entire broader area, not just the Colares cases themselves. The best primary source I found was Bob Pratt quoted Wayida Carvalho, the doctor in Colares at the time, who told Bob Pratt in 1993 that she had treated about 40 people who had been burned and that 2 of them died. She said,
What?
Yeah, she explained a little bit more. She said 2 of them were badly enough off that she sent them to the hospital in the big city, and she later got back death certificates for them saying they had died of a stroke.
Wow.
One of the women showed up with full body paralysis, and when we say paralysis, we usually imagine like a limp body that the person's unable to control.
Right, yeah.
She was describing paralysis like rigid body, to the point where this woman was laid down in the back of the police cruiser and they couldn't close the back door because her legs were sticking out.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Now, she clarifies that members of the Air Force team knew that people had been burned. She was trying to, verify that, yes, the Air Force came and they knew about these attacks. She said that the burns were also interesting. They did not form blisters or resemble burns caused by fire or hot water, but were instead similar to burns caused by cobalt. Also, there was no pain in the infected areas, only itching, and 2 days afterwards, the skin would begin to peel. She said that when treating victims, she often found 2 small puncture wounds very close together, more or less in the center of the burns.
That's crazy. I feel like there might be a translation thing here because I don't think anything will burn if you try hard enough. But cobalt isn't particularly renowned for its
Yeah.
reactivity. But it doesn't sound like this is a typical burn. Maybe this is like a
Yeah.
dermatitis or
No,
whatever.
I completely agree. I think we're probably dealing with a language barrier. Earlier, Colonel Holanda also mentioned iodine burns, which is not a thing. I think
Right,
he
which
meant
also doesn't burn.
discoloration, like you get an
Yeah.
area sterilized with iodine.
Yeah, a stain.
Yeah. But I
Yeah.
think the point is, what she's saying is, these are not typical burns as if they had been hit
Yeah.
by a focused beam of light or
Right.
anything like that. It behaves differently. Is this more
Yeah.
typical of radiation burns? I don't know. But she, as
That's
a
interesting.
doctor, made a point. These are not the type of burns she was used to treating.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Colonel Holanda said, the first lady I interviewed in Colares had been burned by the so-called chupa chupa. I saw the mark. She showed me her left breast. There was a brown stain, as if it were a burn, and 2 perforation dots. Sometimes it's just one. When we were talking to her, she described that she was sitting on a hammock putting a child to sleep, and the environment suddenly started to change temperature. She saw that the roof started to turn reddish, as if you had gotten a cigar close to a sheet of paper. It was getting reddish, and then she could see the sky. The roof disappeared. It was like glass. She could see the sky, so she could see what was on the other side. She was able to see stars. From that hole, first came a green light, and then she went a little numb, and then a red light, a red beam of light that came down and hit her on the breast.
That's wild. So was it like burning a hole in the roof, or?
That's a really good question. And as far as I can tell, the answer is no. And this is reported across multiple encounters. It's not just this one woman.
That's wild.
The beam of light seems to have turned the roof transparent. Now, it's unclear whether they mean the entire roof or like an area of the roof, but there are reports of walls being turned transparent. There's even a group of reporters who came to the area who described a UFO stalking their car, shining a beam of light on them, and the roof of the car turning transparent.
Wow. That's totally wild. And I see why they were saying earlier, it doesn't matter where you went. That's terrifying.
It's super creepy, right? Yeah. Colonel Holanda said they were very terrified. Some said they were sick or numb for days. A citizen told me a light had appeared near his house and focused in his direction. He ran into the house, got a rifle, aimed it at the light, and the light turned red and he fell to the ground. He was barely able to move for 15 days. The first day he was dizzy. He could hear, see, and speak normally, but could barely move. He was in a hammock all that time. But there was nothing serious. He wasn't hit by anything, a projectile or anything of that nature. Just a light that cut off his energy and left him without the ability to move.
Nothing serious. Just a directed energy weapon that causes paralysis for 2 weeks. It's fine.
Yeah, I think what we're getting here is kind of a difference in training, right? Like, this guy is military trained. He's used to, like, I was attacked by aliens. Like, oh my God, were you shot? Were you hurt? Like, no, a beam of light hit me and I fell down. Like, oh, okay. Like, like you don't have a bullet wound, like.
Yeah.
But yeah, agreed. Like, I'm arguably more concerned by, as you put it, the directed energy weapon that causes total paralysis for 2 weeks.
Yeah. I guess maybe the more accurate word would be like nothing grievous or something.
Yeah, but again, we might be dealing with translation error.
Translation. That is interesting though.
Yeah. So speaking of people being terrified, we go back to the fisherman we talked about earlier, Rocio Oliveira. He said, the Air Force people told us the UFOs were not dangerous. Don't be afraid. Everyone was upset, and they were trying to calm people down. They were saying, it's just a little flying apparatus and a little laser light, and people being paralyzed, but they're not taking blood.
Dismissing people's concern is like the exact opposite way to reassure people. Like, it's just,
it cracks me up too that they're like, Sure, there are unknown flying objects and they're shining lasers
Yeah.
on us, but I mean,
Yeah, they're paralyzing
and they're
people, but
paralyzing people, sure, but it's not like they're taking your blood. Like I don't know why
they're
they're
not
like,
taking your
that's the
blood.
line we have to draw. We got to calm these
Yeah.
people down.
The rest of it totally reasonable. Yeah, that happens.
Yeah. Sergeant Costa again said, the people of Colares live in a state of collective hysteria, its inhabitants
Yeah.
terrified by the appearance of mysterious lights of unknown origin. They don't eat, they don't sleep, they don't fish. The population lives in a state of terror. At times, a scream of fear, and then the news is spread that the apparatus attacked so and so.
God, yeah, I don't blame him.
Yeah.
I would be just as freaked out.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
especially with the Air Force telling you not to worry. Like,
I
I'm
know,
gonna
right?
worry.
Now I definitely will have to worry. I would also be setting up cameras though,
Yeah.
like
Well,
crazy.
it's the 70s in
I
a
know
remote
this is the
fishing village,
70s.
but yeah. So
Yeah.
perhaps a better view of what life was like on the ground for people than the Air Force investigators and stuff is this
Mm-hmm.
quote that Bob Pratt got from Ana Celia Oliveira, who was a school teacher who was about 6 years old at the time. She said,
Okay.
I will never forget it. People and animals were attacked. There was no food. There was a terrible lack of food because no one was fishing. People would not go out to their vegetable gardens for crops. Everybody tried to go around in large groups because no one wanted to be alone. All of Colares stopped.
Yeah, I mean, it's bad when a fishing village stops fishing.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely. Because that's not just how you make
yeah,
money. That's how you get fed.
yeah,
you know?
that's how you live.
Yeah.
Yeah,
She
that's wild.
continued, she said, at 6 o'clock, it got dark and we would go to sleep. Groups of as many
Hmm.
as 50 to 60 women and children would all get together in one house. The men would stay
Wow.
awake all night. They lit bonfires and banged on pots and pans to make noise to scare the UFOs away. People began to shoot into the sky to scare them away. One time, I heard men shouting and ran to the door and opened it and saw many UFOs in formation, and suddenly they went in all directions. The objects moved very quickly.
That sounds just like, I don't know. That sounds so crazy,
Mm-hmm.
and they sound so unprepared. Like banging pots and pans. Like that's a level of desperation that
Yeah. I
is
think
hard to
unprepared
fathom.
isn't the right word. I think desperate is a better word, like you were saying.
Yeah,
Like
desperate. Yeah,
we're at our wits' end. The Air Force is here. There are no
yeah,
guns. Like, what can we do? I don't know. Try to scare them away.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
that particular description of opening a door because men are yelling and seeing a group of UFOs in formation just suddenly scatter like cockroaches when the light turns on, like
yeah.
that
Right.
is terrifying to me. Like that feels like a scene from an M. Night Shyamalan movie. Like I can vividly imagine that and how freaked out I would be by that sight.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Sergeant Alvaro Pinto Santos said people were really afraid, really scared. They didn't know what to do. They were so terrified they didn't fish. They wanted guns to shoot. And we had to explain to them
Yeah,
that they couldn't shoot at the UFOs or things could get worse. Colonel Holanda
yeah.
adds, the people shot at the discs very often, and we told them, don't do that. Jesus.
I mean, like, oh God, I get it, and also I don't know that you can tell people that. Like,
Right?
trying to convince terrified locals that the best they can do is bang pots and pans. Like,
Like, hey,
no,
I understand these things are attacking you and sucking your blood, not sucking your blood, sorry.
no,
But
yeah,
like,
absolutely
please
not.
don't
Just
start
paralyzing.
an intergalactic war.
Right?
Like,
Yeah,
I got a little
yeah,
bit more pressing issues, Bob. Thanks.
yeah, yeah. Serious.
All right, so let's talk about the Air Force response. You've got a good understanding of
Okay.
what life was like on the ground.
Yeah.
This was not like an occasional thing. This was an ongoing thing for months. People are terrified. They're
Yeah.
living in fear. They are not fishing. The Air Force has
Yeah.
come to town to start investigating. Uh, this is a quote from Brigadier Oliveira, the Air Force base commander in Belen. He said, if
Okay.
it's something in the air, it's for us to help. The people in Colares were
Okay.
really upset and they believed something very strange was happening. So I wanted proof. I sent a team there. I wanted real proof of what was going on.
Nice. Okay. So that's good. At least we've got some reasonable response. I hope they I know this is absurd, but I hope they gave it a cool like name, like Project Starscream or
it,
I don't know, something like that.
it was called Prato, which translates to Operation Plate.
What? Like a dinner plate?
Well, Chuck, what's another word for a plate?
Um oh god, a saucer? Yeah, right.
Operation Saucer, buddy.
Okay. Well, with a cool code name and the backing of a brigadier, uh like so now we get to hear if this is the US, they sent like two scientists and a donkey. Did Brazil outcompete us and send like real soldiers or something?
According to Bob Pratt, it was a small team from the intelligence service consisting only of
Okay.
Captain Hollanda and 6 sergeants, who were armed
Hmm.
only with a theodolite, cameras, and tape recorders. The intelligence agents spent 4 months from October 77 to January 78 in Colares and other villages interviewing people who had encounters or sightings.
Okay. Armed with a what?
I'd make fun of you, but I had to look this up also. A theodolite is a surveying instrument for measuring angles. You know, when you see the guys at the construction site with the thing on a tripod and they're
Yeah,
measuring something else. It's one of those. It's a handheld version.
that's
And it's so you could track the angles that the UFO was moving at.
oh, it's like how does the grounds level matter in this? Like, what is this a dual thing? Like, yeah. Also, while you're out there, do a survey.
Yeah, while you're at it,
Like,
get a,
that
get a
makes more
feel for the
sense.
land. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bob Pratt continues. He said, Hollanda and his team carried out their investigation dressed in civilian clothing and took no weapons with them. They lived in a borrowed beach house at Colares. They slept in hammocks they took with them. They cooked their own food, washed their own clothes in a stream, dried them on bushes, and drove their own cars.
I mean, I gotta say that sounds pretty nice, and I would totally do that. Like, just me and a coconut investigating some alien sightings.
Investigating. Yeah, we're on it,
Yes,
boss.
exactly.
Gonna need another few weeks.
Yeah. You know what? Just keep us out here. It's gonna take months. Yeah. Okay, so at least like this is Air Force though. So did they have like at least some sophisticated equipment, radar or something that they could back up the investigation or anything?
According to Bob Pratt, the UFOs were never tracked on radar because no radar existed in the Belém area at that time. Nor were any fighter
Okay.
planes sent up to try to intercept them because the nearest jet base was at Brasilia, 1,000 miles south. They learned about sightings in
Wow.
other localities only by word of mouth from the inhabitants and the police.
Wow. Okay. 1,000 miles is like it's quite a shot. It
Brazil's
makes
big.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like I need to get a proper map that isn't the Mercator projection
Mhm.
like somewhere on my wall just so anyways. So yeah, so what did what did they do with their survey gear and tape recorders?
Bob Pratt says, for the most part, they slept during the daytime and stayed up all night
Yeah.
watching the skies, taking photographs when UFOs were seen, and recording the information. They interviewed hundreds of witnesses, taking testimony on tape recorders, and later typing up the reports.
I'm not finding the part about this that doesn't sound incredibly satisfying, but I will say that it doesn't seem like the brigadier was expecting very much.
Yeah, and I don't think it was just the brigadier. Colonel Hollanda, in fact, was quoted as saying, I'm going to tell you that honestly, I came in as the devil's advocate. I went in to demystify it all and say, this thing didn't exist. Like, let's say it was like a collective hallucination. Like,
Sure.
something was really being seen, but it was nothing extraterrestrial. I don't know, birds, plumage of an owl reflecting the midnight, something like that.
Plumage of an owl reflecting moonlight. I love it. Uh, yeah.
Yeah. Now, the good news is, despite their attitude coming in, well, good news. Despite their attitude coming in, Bob Pratt says during the investigation, the agents themselves had more than 200 sightings of their own. Holanda said
Wow.
his team took more than 500 photos and more than 3 hours of motion picture films of UFOs, and said he believed more than 1,000 photos existed.
Wow. Holy shit.
Yeah, right.
I'm really hoping that you're going to follow this up with, and they've all been leaked, but
Go ahead and
I'm
put a pin in
not
that for
holding
the
my
moment.
breath. Yeah.
So I've got a couple of sightings reported here by Sergeant Santos. So, they were, of course,
Okay.
reporting all their sightings because they didn't expect to see anything. Then they showed up and like, hey, here it is.
Oh.
So here are 3 ones that I think do a good job of illustrating how varied what they were seeing was. They were not seeing the same thing all the time.
Okay.
Sergeant Santos says, one night in Colares, we saw something like a great big tub about 1.5 meters in diameter, maybe 80 meters from us. Another sergeant took photos. The light was so intense that it hurt the eyes.
Wow. Okay. So not just like bright, but painfully bright.
Yeah, he
Huh.
compared it to the light of a welding torch.
Yeah. Wow.
Sergeant
Okay.
Santos said, another time we saw a strange light. It came down very low. It was pulsing red on the bottom, almost violet, and on top it was white. We thought it was going to land, but it swooped back up. It was kind of heart-shaped with a little dome on top. There was no sound. It just took off with a speed that was absolutely incredible. Just zoomed off into space. I thought it was very beautiful.
So slightly jarring change of pace there, but kind of charming. Like I imagine the next like 4 sentences were about how lovely the lights were, and
Right.
maybe an iambic pentameter or
Yeah,
something.
perhaps this is a cultural difference between the Brazilian Air Force and ours.
It
An
could be, yeah,
appreciation for
actually.
beauty.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, and then Sergeant Santos says, another time we saw a reddish yellow object, like an intense rotating beacon. And I'm going to cut out a part here where he describes the flight path across the sky. He said, this sequence took 45 seconds. Considering the short time for these maneuvers, it would have had to pass from a subsonic velocity to a supersonic velocity. And then, normally, there would have been a sonic boom, which did not occur during this sighting. This and other cases were unexplainable.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the Lue's 5 observables, right?
That's right. Yeah. For those who don't remember, during Lue's time with ATIP and OSAP, they came up with a list of 5 observables that indicated that the object was like a UAP worth studying instead of like a plastic bag caught in the wind. So this one in particular is hypersonic velocities without signatures.
Okay. What about the others?
Yeah, they documented all of them. They got anti-gravity lift, sudden and instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocities without signatures, low observability, which normally Lue says means like cloaking devices and stuff, but in this case, it was because they could only make out the glow and not the shape of the object, and transmedium travel from going in and out of the water.
Well, check, and check. That sounds like all of them.
Right. They even got the bonus 6th observable, which is
extra
biological
credit.
effects on witnesses.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I get why Lue was so interested in the case. It really has like everything.
It really does. According to Bob Pratt, the final report on the operation was over 500 pages long.
Huh. Okay. So coming from a team that expected to be debunking the whole thing, I'm sure that did not go over particularly well with the Brigadier, did it?
Oh, Chuck, I've jaded you so much. Brigadier Oliveira, the base commander, said, quote, they brought a film for me to see. I thought it was very interesting. I saw something flashing and another one coming towards. But what is true is there's a lighthouse there. So I called the Navy commandant and asked, do you have a lighthouse in that area? And they said, yes, we have. And I asked, was there a problem there? And they said, yes. Sometimes the lighthouse was blinking and sometimes it wasn't. So there's no proof because there was a malfunctioning lighthouse. I think it was just mass hysteria that produced the whole thing. I took an impartial position. I just wanted proof, but the proof was destroyed when I discovered the whole business of the malfunctioning lighthouse.
Yep. Yeah. All checks out.
Yep,
Definitely impartial position there. They didn't want
absolutely. Absolutely.
to. Yeah, let's
Bob
ignore all those
Pratt
other things.
Bob Pratt says the team would probably disagree, pointing out that, among other things, one of the films showing UFOs going in and out of the water was shot on the far side of a different island, well out of sight of the Colares lighthouse.
Ha. Yeah. Yeah. That checks out.
He keeps going. He says the Brigadier's theory also does not explain something that was happening elsewhere in the region. An almost identical flap of the same magnitude had just taken place in the neighboring state of Maranhão to the east, or it may have just been an earlier part of the same flap. From April to
Hmm.
July of 1977, UFOs were seen almost every night in a wide area around Pinheiro, a small city about 500 miles southeast of Colares.
Okay. Tell me more.
According to Manuel Paiva, the mayor of Pinheiro, 2/3 of the people of this city saw a big ball of fire the size of a long playing record. It came at high speed and then it would stop. Suddenly it would go up or down with the same velocity. Lots of people who were fishing here in canoes and boats were chased by this ball of fire. Many people complained that their eyes hurt after they had stared at it. The object seemed to be a living thing with colors swirling around in it like molten steel and an occasional flash of light as if explosions were coming inside it. It made many people sick. Everyone was afraid. Many people were afraid to go out at night because of what might happen to them if the fire caught them. Fishermen and farmers reported they had been burned when UFOs suddenly and silently appeared in a great blast of light in the night sky just over their heads. The fishermen were so afraid that they wouldn't go fishing for 3 or 4 months. Many people wouldn't even go into their backyard to relieve themselves at night.
Wow. So this is like 500 miles away from Colares.
Mm-hmm. And exactly the same thing happening.
Yeah, that is one lighthouse.
It's a very powerful lighthouse indeed. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Now, you would expect that would be case closed, right? Hey,
Yeah,
there was a lighthouse. Don't worry about it. But as has happened with several big cases in the US also, someone started leaking Operation Prato documents to UFO researchers in the area.
Nice.
Bob Pratt says, over the years, I was given 3 batches of documents in 1991, 1997, and 1999. Altogether, I have about 400 pages, including the 18 photos of UFOs with identifying information and sketches on the backs of the photos. Of this 400 or so, about half were duplicates. Some of the photocopies are a bit faded and hard to read. No doubt copies of copies of copies, etc. Exactly how many sightings were investigated is not known, but the pages that were leaked give details of 325 incidents.
Wow, 325. So they were. It sounds like were all of these documents just about
These were the Operation Prato documents. Yeah. So the
Okay.
brigadier sent the guys in to investigate, kind of expecting them to debunk. The colonel in charge, Hollanda, expected to debunk. But then they showed up and saw the people had been attacked and witnessed everything themselves. They worked on it for 4 months before they were called home. They produced a 500-page document, and the brigadier shut it down. So someone starts leaking these documents, and yeah, we can see that they investigated, over 300 incidents, even though they had showed up as debunkers. And
that's incredible.
To get better than that, you'll remember that I mentioned earlier that Colonel Hollanda spoke out. That's where we got all these quotes from. Bob Pratt said, in 1997, not long after he retired as a lieutenant colonel, Hollanda decided he was no longer obligated to remain silent and publicly discussed Operation Prato.
Huh. Okay. So was he becoming a whistleblower or just like fed up with the government,
Yeah.
or
I have
was
found
there
out
a
recently
difference?
that whistleblower is a loaded term. There are apparently legal
Yeah.
definitions of it. In some cases,
Yeah. Yeah.
you are a whistleblower. In other cases, you aren't. But certainly in the colloquial usage of here is someone who knew a secret that was being covered up and is speaking out about it. Yes,
Yeah.
he became a whistleblower.
Hmm.
He gave an interview. He gave several interviews, but in particular, he gave an interview to Brazil's UFO magazine. And the researchers
Hmm.
were even able to get a few other members of his team to go on record and back him up.
Nice.
But before the issue
Oh.
could be published, Hollanda committed suicide.
Oof. That sucks. And not at all suspicious.
Yeah, it's super suspicious. And anytime you see someone talking about Colares, they make the same point that Hollanda died under mysterious circumstances shortly after speaking
Yeah.
publicly about it. And, we see the same thing here with the Boeing whistleblower who turned up dead shortly after
Mm-hmm.
testifying.
Yeah.
It is worth noting that the person who interviewed him for the magazine does not believe that he was silenced. He said that Hollanda was legitimately
Hmm.
struggling with depression. He thinks it was a quote unquote genuine suicide, but I mean,
Yeah.
fuck, man. It's brutal either
Yeah.
way, right?
It's an awful outcome either way. But I think that if you're getting to a spot where you feel like the only option you have available is to break your oath,
Mm-hmm.
like that has to be a pretty depressing situation to be in.
Yeah, for real.
So
According to Bob Pratt, Operation Prato was once again in the news on May 20th, 2005, as a result of a years-long campaign by Brazilian ufologists who gathered 36,000 signatures to get the Air Force to
nice.
open its UFO files. In meetings on May 20th with ufologists at military headquarters in Brasilia, 3 top generals acknowledged that the Air Force had long been concerned about UFOs and had systemically tracked them since 1954. Brazilian
Wow.
ufology leader A.J. Gavard and a half dozen other ufologists were allowed to examine a number of UFO files from the Air Force archives, including about 110 photos and 160 documents from Operation Prato.
Nice. Okay. So I'm a little confused. Were these like declassified or are they just like
Nope. They just let these
okay.
6 UFO researchers come in the building and look at some of the files one time.
Weird.
Yeah.
Weird.
Bob Pratt said, according to Gavard, the Air Force leaders said they, 1, recognized the importance of ufology, 2,
Okay.
pledged to help get classified files open to the public, and 3,
Nice.
guaranteed that steps would be taken to form a joint committee of military and civilian UFO researchers to study the phenomenon.
Sounds promising, but from your tone of voice, I feel like this didn't happen.
As far as I can tell, it didn't happen. Now, of course,
Yeah.
I'm not
Okay.
in Brazil. I don't speak Portuguese. Maybe something did
Right.
come of it,
How
but
would you know?
any of the research I did, any of the articles I read, nobody mentions any follow up on this. This seemed to be a one
Yeah.
time thing.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah. Now, there is a fun little twist here that brings it full
Okay.
circle back to Lue Elizondo and OSAP. Legendary UFO journalist George Knapp recently had Brazilian UFO researcher Tiago Tichetti on his podcast to talk about Colares. Tichetti said, Captain Hollanda told researchers that they recorded more than 22 hours of film. The
Wow.
footage shows UAPs coming in and out of rivers, of lagoons, UFOs coming from the woods, from the forest, or passing by, or just hovering, or shooting beams of light to the ground as if searching for something, perhaps. But
Wow.
we don't know where the footage is. We have heard some
Yeah.
rumors that this footage is now in the United States. We have suspicion that the American agencies, probably some with 3 letters, came to
Yeah.
Brazil and confiscated or got or borrowed the mini documents, photos, and those films.
Yeah. Okay. That all makes sense.
Now, George Knapp chimes in after Tiago finishes saying that. He says, the first time I met Tiago in person, he told me what his suspicion was, is that it came here to Las Vegas, that it went to BAAS, that's Bigelow Aerospace
Yes.
Advanced,
Oh.
whatever. It was the
Something.
organization that Bob Bigelow set up to work with OSAP. So he said
Okay.
these files came to BASS, to OSAP, the DIA program, and I could just confirm this. I have seen files from the Brazilian Air Force that did go to BASS. I have not seen
Hmm.
video. So if OSAP had the video, they did not let me see it.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so the dinner Lue talks about uh, was where they were setting up like document sharing with OSAP.
It
Maybe they
sure
were handing
sounds
over
like
some of
it.
that footage,
Yeah.
and maybe that's Lue confirming some of these suspicions from George Knapp in a way
That
that
happened
like
after
he can.
Lue's book came out. They were talking about
Oh,
it
okay.
because of Lue's
Oh,
book,
okay.
same reason we are. But yeah, totally.
Oh, okay. All right, got it.
It may be that this is Lue kind of nodding to, yes, OSAP got all these
Mm-hmm.
files, and that's why I'm so confident that Colares happened. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that's a crazy story. I see why it captured Lou's attention. It's got that like threat narrative that
Yeah.
that works so well in the U.S.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
But I feel like it's so different from all the others.
mm-hmm.
Like I don't know. The UFOs paralyzing people who pointed guns at them. That makes sense. But then the rest all feel like medical procedures. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know how
it's
to feel
super
about it.
weird, right? And it's funny you say that because Lue presents this very clearly as a threat narrative. Like you said, right?
Yeah.
Here are these peaceful villagers and they are attacked by UFOs. Um, Colonel Hollanda, asked about the purpose of the UFOs, said, I'll answer you with a personal conclusion of mine. As I told you, I was a jungle operations officer. I had a lot of contact with indigenous tribes, and we were very careful, very concerned about not transmitting any disease that was contained in ourselves to them. The disease in our bodies is controlled by antibodies that we have, and they
Mm-hmm.
didn't. And you could pass them, flu, measles, tuberculosis, because we have that. And that would be a tragedy.
Yeah, I
He
think I
said,
see where this is going.
if I were them, meaning the UFOs, and I put myself in their shoes, and I needed an open, frank appearance, a direct appearance, what would I have to do? I would have to protect myself, knowing that you carry in your bodies something that can damage mine, you see. The only way to defend myself is if I had a sample of your blood, a sample of your tissue. It was not difficult to imagine that this is what they were doing. These things became a joke to some people. The chupa chupa, they were called. But they were collecting material. They were collecting blood
Hmm.
in order to see what was contained in the blood that could damage them in necessary future contact. But not only blood, also material, cells. I don't know what this high energy beam could do, if it could carry material too, pieces of the body, particles of the body that could later be analyzed by them.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of get it. As an attack, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's very ineffective. But but in other contexts, like medical, it makes a little more sense.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I buy the like
Yeah.
antibody thing, but
Yeah. So Hollanda
yeah.
continues. He's like, I heard from people it was an act of aggression. And to me, it doesn't seem to be aggression. I thought they were collecting material in order to defend themselves in a contact event that needed to be close and that this could damage them because of some disease of ours. And I think this kind of
Mhm.
gets back to something we've talked about before, which is it's kind of difficult to project our motivations onto them.
Yeah.
Does it look like surveillance? Yeah, kind of. Does it look like an attack? Yeah, kind of. Does it look like a medical intervention? Yeah, kind of. Is it any of those? Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like trying to understand octopi.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they just have like a fundamentally different neural architecture than we do, and yeah, I don't know. It makes it feel futile to understand the motivations of our friends from out of town.
Man, I freaking love that nickname. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm totally with you. And I think it's only human for us to look at this and try to put it
Yeah.
in terms that we understand, a narrative that we understand. And I think at the end of the
Right.
day, all we can do is say, this happened and this happened and this happened. And any attempt to read more into it than that is inherently risky because you risk
Yeah.
anthropomorphizing and
Right.
misinterpreting in both directions, right? Like if you go, oh,
Yeah,
obviously
right.
this wasn't an attack. Obviously, this was the equivalent of us sedating African rhino out in the savannah and taking its blood.
Right.
To it, that would be an alien encounter. Sure, that's
Right.
one way of viewing it. But it's just as possible to go, obviously, this wasn't a medical intervention. They were hurting people. But then
Mm-hmm.
the other problem with the medical intervention, with the threat narrative, is they seem to have gone to great lengths not to kill anybody. As much as we were making fun of
Right.
Holanda saying, well, nothing grievous happened. He's not wrong, right? Like being
Yeah.
sedated for a few days, maybe that is them taking the non-violent approach of, we can kill
Right.
you with a
Yeah.
heartbeat. We're not trying to. We just need you to stop shooting at us.
Right. And the counterpoint is maybe that was their most powerful weapon.
Yeah,
And
that's the other way.
like, I don't
We have
know.
nothing to worry about, you guys. They were using nets and hooks and laser beams.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So yeah, that's Colares. It's such a weird story.
Okay.
You can see why I kind of put it off
Yeah.
talking about it, because
Yeah.
the instant you talk about aliens attack, like it gets loaded. It gets complicated.
Yeah.
And I think the only conclusion that I can take away from this is it's messy. And we have quite a lot of information indicating that something happened. People were affected. We have photos. Like, again, this is well documented. What it means, I am not comfortable answering that.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hard to know. And it sure doesn't sound like a mass hallucination.
No.
So
yeah,
I don't know.
I don't think they have an all-powerful lighthouse that can hypnotize everyone within 2,000 miles.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's hope the recording worked this time and you all get to hear us.
For real. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on It's a Very Exciting Time. You can find show notes and more on our website, veryexcitingtime.com, as well as links to our Discord and social media accounts.
And you can email us at Scott or Chuck at veryexcitingtime.com. And if you'd like to support the show, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/veryexcitingtime.
And Chuck, as always, my wife thanks you for listening to me talk about UFOs so she doesn't have to.